Have you ever felt like you've already failed before you even really began? Not in the way people talk about in motivational speeches. Not the kind of failure you write about in resumes. Learned a valuable lesson, moved forward. No, I mean the kind of failure that settles deep in your bones. The quiet kind. The kind that whispers to you at 3 a.m. Maybe this is all you'll ever be. You wake up, and for a split second you forget. Forget the weight pressing down on your chest. Forget the job you lost. The person who left, the dream that slipped away. But then it all comes rushing back. And you wonder how it got this far. How you ended up here. Maybe you once had something that lit you up inside. A dream. A plan. A version of yourself you were proud of. But somewhere along the way life chipped away at it. A rejection here. A disappointment there. Until one day, you looked in the mirror and saw someone you didn't quite recognize. You're still breathing. Still functioning. But the fire? It's not just dimmed. It's almost out. And yet, you're still here. That means something. It really does. You might think you're wasting time, falling behind while everyone else is racing ahead. But maybe, just maybe, you're being quietly reshaped. In the dark. In the stillness. Because sometimes, what looks like an ending is really just the quiet before the real beginning. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Like you're screaming inside, but the world just keeps scrolling? Let me tell you about someone who felt the same. A woman who was once so lost, so low, so painfully human, that she thought she might not make it to the next day. Her name was Joanne. She was in her early 30s, divorced, jobless, raising a child on her own, living in a tiny flat in Edinburgh, barely surviving off welfare checks. The heating didn't always work. So she'd bundle up her daughter and push the stroller to the nearest cafe. Not for the coffee, but because it was warm and she could write. That was all she had. Her story. An idea about a boy wizard, scribbled on napkins and scraps of paper. A story she believed in, even when nobody else did. 12 publishers said no. Some didn't even reply. Her manuscript was tossed aside, called too strange, too long, too childish. Can you imagine how that felt? To pour your soul onto the page and be told over and over again that it didn't matter? But she kept going. Not because she was fearless. She was scared, exhausted, and hanging on by threads. But the story inside her wouldn't let her give up. That story, Harry Potter, would go on to touch millions, shape childhoods, and remind us all that even the smallest, most broken people can change the world. Before she became J.K. Rowling, she was just Joanne. And she was just like you. Tired. Rejected. Running out of hope. So when you think you're too far gone, too old, too behind, too damaged, remember her. She was sitting in a cafe, with nothing but a pen, story, and a belief that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. And she was right. Let this be a whisper in your storm. You don't have to be extraordinary to begin again. You don't need a guarantee. You don't need applause. You just need a little courage to try again tomorrow. If all you did today was survive, that's enough. If your dream feels distant, hold on. If your heart feels heavy, rest here for a while. You can stay. The world moves fast, but healing is slow, and that's okay. Before she became J.K. Rowling, you are becoming the bestsellers, the movies, the fame. She was just Joanne, a woman in her early 30s. No job, no home of her own, no one beside her except her baby girl. She had left an abusive marriage, crossed borders to start over in Scotland, and with a newborn in her arms, she realized what survival actually meant. Not in theory. In reality. In heating bills you couldn't pay. In skipping meals so your child could eat. In writing stories between diaper changes and quiet cries at night. Joanne didn't live, she endured. She had no career to fall back on, no family fortune, no safety net. She was living on government welfare. Each week she would receive a small check, barely enough to buy food, let alone pay rent. There were days when she had to choose between turning on the heat or buying formula for her daughter. And she chose her daughter. Always. She would walk the streets of Edinburgh, pushing a second-hand stroller with one hand and holding a notebook in the other. Not because it was poetic. Not because she was chasing her dream, but because it was all she had left. Her home was so cold in winter that she'd take her daughter to cafes just to stay warm. And while the baby napped, she would write. Pen trembling in her hand, she scribbled on napkins, on scrap paper, and cheap notebooks from the pound store. Each sentence a thread keeping her from falling apart. She was not trying to be famous. She was just trying to survive the day, without breaking. No one was cheering her on. There were no viral videos, no agents calling, no crowds waiting. She was invisible, alone. And still she wrote. That's what makes her story powerful. Not the magic, not the money, but the quiet, relentless courage of a mother who refused to give up, even when the world had already written her off. She was dealing with depression so dark that she later said, I was as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain, without being homeless. She thought of giving up, not just on the book, but on life. The pain was that deep, the hopelessness that thick. But then she'd look at her baby girl, tiny, innocent, entirely dependent on her, and somehow, that child gave her a reason to stay, to try, to write. So she did. When the baby slept, she wrote. When she could borrow a few minutes to herself, she wrote. She finished her manuscript, by hand. A full novel. No guarantee. No publisher. Just paper and ink, and a mother's desperate hope that maybe this story matters. She sent it out. One publisher said no. Then another. Then 10 more. 12 rejections in total. Each one like a small stone, thrown at a house already built on sand. But she kept going. Because there was nothing else left to believe in, except this story. And the feeling that maybe, if she could finish it, if someone would read it, she might matter again. She had no agent, no influence, no leverage, but she had one thing, a story. And sometimes, a story is enough. Would anyone care? She didn't know. But she sent it one more time. Bloomsbury, a small publishing house. And the editor, bless him, gave the first chapter to his 8-year-old daughter. She read it, loved it, asked for more. And that was it. No fanfare. No big break. Just a small yes. After 1,000 silent no's. They agreed to publish 500 copies. That was all. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. But she was finally seen. Bạn thấy phần này đã đủ độ chạm, đồng cảm, và chữa lành chưa? Nếu bạn muốn, mình sẽ viết phần cao trào bước ngoặt thành công theo kết chữa lành, phần 3, ngay sau đó để hoàn thành toàn video. Bạn có muốn tiếp tục phần cuối cùng luôn không? You said. Dài và da diết hơn. ChatGPT said. Updated saved memory. Tuyệt vời. Dưới đây là phiên bản mở rộng của phần 2, kể sâu hơn. Da diết hơn về hoàn cảnh nghèo khó và đơn độc của J.K. Rowling khi làm mẹ đơn thân. Văn phong nhẹ, buồn, lắng đọng, chạm vào cảm giác thất bại và kiệt sức của người xem. Đúng chất chữa lành cho thị trường Mỹ. Studio microphone part 2 before the magic. A mother, a baby, and the cold. Before there was a book deal. Before there were theme parks, red carpets. And a name the world would never forget. There was just her, Joanne, a woman holding her baby girl in one arm, and a crumpled rejection letter in the other. A woman sitting in a small, cold apartment, wrapped in a blanket she couldn't afford to wash too often, because laundry costs money, and she had none to spare. She had just left a marriage that broke her spirit, escaped with barely more than a suitcase, a child, and a manuscript that no one wanted. She moved to Edinburgh with hope in one hand, and fear clenched tightly in the other. There were nights when the flat was so cold that her baby's lips turned pale. Nights when she would light a single candle and sit beside it like it was a fire, praying it wouldn't go out before the baby fell asleep. There was no heating, no help, just silence, and a pile of unpaid bills. She had no job, no partner, no family close by, just government assistance barely enough to survive. She was ashamed of every time she had to stand in line, filling out forms, hoping this week's money would come through in time to buy diapers and maybe a small treat for her child, so she wouldn't feel the poverty they were living in. She walked the streets pushing a second-hand stroller, not for exercise, not to meet friends, but because if she stayed inside that cold flat too long, she feared she'd fall apart completely. She'd pass cafes with fogged-up windows and warm light inside. She couldn't afford the coffee, but she'd go in anyway, order the cheapest thing on the menu, just to sit for a while, just to feel human again. And while her baby slept in the stroller beside her, she would write, not because she had time, but because it was the only thing that kept her alive. Writing was her thread to herself, her way of whispering, "I'm still here." She carried around a story that no one else could see. A boy with a lightning scar. A world of magic born from a mind that was, at the time, trapped in poverty. She didn't write for fame. She wrote to breathe, to survive another day in a world that felt like it had forgotten her. She would scribble down paragraphs while her child napped, then rush home and type them into an old typewriter she had borrowed, praying it wouldn't break down because she couldn't afford to fix it. Sometimes, she'd stay up all night editing, not because she was inspired, but because insomnia had become her new normal. Grief doesn't let you sleep easily. Every no from a publisher hit her like a door slamming shut. Each rejection felt personal, like the world was confirming what she feared most. You are not enough. But even in that pain, she held on to the smallest flicker of belief, that maybe this story mattered, that maybe she mattered. She didn't have anyone to lift her up. No mentors. No cheerleaders. No "you got this" messages. All she had was paper, ink, and a little girl who needed her. If you've ever sat in silence, feeling like the world moved on without you. If you've ever stood in front of the fridge, trying to figure out how to make dinner with what's left. If you've ever put on a brave face for someone smaller than you, while your heart was breaking in secret, then you know exactly how she felt. Joanne wasn't a hero. She was a woman with a broken heart, shaky hands, and the kind of sadness that doesn't show up in photos. But she wrote anyway, 'cause sometimes, even when the world offers you nothing, you create something. And sometimes that something, it didn't happen with fireworks. There was no dramatic music.
No spotlight.
It happened quietly. After 12 rejections, after being told her story was too long, too strange, too childish, Joanne sent the manuscript one more time. This time to Bloomsbury, a small publishing house, just another name on a growing list of probably nots. The editor didn't read it right away, but his 8-year-old daughter did, and she asked for more. That little girl changed everything. Bloomsbury agreed to publish 500 copies. Just 500. No one expected it to do well. It was a gentle yes, small, almost fragile. But sometimes, all you need is one yes. Rowling didn't become a billionaire overnight. She still struggled, still second-guessed herself, still felt like maybe this would all fall apart. But it didn't, because the story she wrote in the dark, with a baby sleeping beside her, with no money in the bank, with tears she never let anyone see, was a story the world was ready for. Harry Potter wasn't just a book. It was a reminder that magic can come from the most broken places, that love, friendship, and courage can still matter, even when the world is falling apart. And Joanne? She went from a woman who couldn't afford to heat her home, to the most successful author of our time. But more than that, she became someone who proved that beginnings can look like endings, and that hope doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers. You might not have a book. You might not even know what your dream is anymore. Maybe life has burned so much of you down that all you're left with is ash. But hear this. There's still something glowing beneath that ash. Even if it's just a flicker. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be okay. You just need to stay. To hold on through one more night. To believe just for a second that maybe your story isn't over yet. 'Cause maybe you're not failing. Maybe you're just in between. Between endings and beginnings. Between heartbreak and healing. Between the life you thought you'd live and the one still waiting to be written. So tonight, if the silence is loud, if the world feels too heavy, if you're tired of trying, let this story be a hand on your shoulder, a voice in the dark, a reason to breathe again. J.K. Rowling once thought she had lost everything, but she still had a story. And that story saved her. Maybe yours will too. You can stay right here, as you are. And when you're ready, It didn't
You'll
happen
write your
with
next
fireworks.
chapter.
There was no dramatic music.
No spotlight.
It happened quietly. After 12 rejections, after being told her story was too long, too strange, too childish, Joanne sent the manuscript one more time. This time to Bloomsbury, a small publishing house, just another name on a growing list of probably nots. The editor didn't read it right away, but his 8-year-old daughter did, and she asked for more. That little girl changed everything. Bloomsbury agreed to publish 500 copies. Just 500. No one expected it to do well. It was a gentle yes, small, almost fragile. But sometimes, all you need is one yes. Rowling didn't become a billionaire overnight. She still struggled, still second-guessed herself, still felt like maybe this would all fall apart. But it didn't, because the story she wrote in the dark, with a baby sleeping beside her, with no money in the bank, with tears she never let anyone see, was a story the world was ready for. Harry Potter wasn't just a book. It was a reminder that magic can come from the most broken places, that love, friendship, and courage can still matter, even when the world is falling apart. And Joanne? She went from a woman who couldn't afford to heat her home to the most successful author of our time. But more than that, she became someone who proved that beginnings can look like endings, and that hope doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers. You might not have a book. You might not even know what your dream is anymore. Maybe life has burned so much of you down that all you're left with is ash. But hear this. There's still something glowing beneath that ash. Even if it's just a flicker. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be okay. You just need to stay. To hold on through one more night. To believe just for a second that maybe your story isn't over yet. As maybe you're not failing. Maybe you're just in between. Between endings and beginnings. Between heartbreak and healing. Between the life you thought you'd live and the one still waiting to be written. So tonight, if the silence is loud, if the world feels too heavy, if you're tired of trying, let this story be a hand on your shoulder, a voice in the dark, a reason to breathe again. J.K. Rowling once thought she had lost everything, but she still had a story. And that story saved her. Maybe yours will too. You can stay right here. You don't have to pretend you're okay and right when you're now. Ready, it's
You'll
okay
write
to
your
admit
next
you're
chapter.
exhausted, to say you're scared, to whisper to yourself at 2 a.m., I don't know how much longer I can do this. Because truthfully, life is heavy sometimes. Sometimes it hurts in ways you can't explain. Sometimes it feels like you're standing still while everyone else is moving forward, getting promoted, falling in love, building something, and you're just surviving. You scroll past the highlight reels, the perfectly lit rooms, the smiling faces, and deep down a voice inside you says, maybe I'm falling behind, maybe I'm not enough. But that voice is lying. You are not behind. You are on your own path. And just because your journey doesn't look like someone else's, doesn't mean it isn't worthy. It just means it's yours. And yours is sacred. Even when it's messy, even when it's slow. You've come through things that would have broken someone else. You've carried pain without recognition. You've smiled through grief. You've held space for others while your own heart was quietly unraveling. That is not weakness. That is strength. Quiet, unglamorous, unposted strength. And if you've made it this far, if you've woken up day after day despite the ache in your soul, you have already done something extraordinary. So please don't give up now. You don't need to know how the story ends. You don't need to have a 5-year plan. You don't even need to feel hopeful right now. All you need is to take one breath, then another. Because sometimes courage doesn't look like roaring. Sometimes courage is whispering, I'll try again tomorrow. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to pause. But please don't stop. Keep going. Even if it's slow. Even if it's small. Even if no one else claps for you or notices the effort it takes. Keep going. Not because life is perfect, but because you are not done yet. There is still joy ahead you haven't tasted. Still people you haven't met who will love you in ways that feel like home. Still days when the sun will rise and your heart will feel light again when you least expect it. And you'll look back and be so grateful that you stayed. You don't have to become someone extraordinary. You don't need to fix everything today. You are enough, as you are. But if there is one thing I hope you do, it's this. Be brave enough to keep going. Even when it's hard. Even when your legs shake. Even when your heart is tired. Even when your dreams feel too far, too foolish, too broken. Be brave enough to believe that something beautiful can still be born from the ashes, because it can, and it will. The world is better with you in it. Even if you haven't done anything spectacular. Even if all you did today was breathe. That's enough. You're enough. So rest when you need. Cry when you must. But please, keep going. Your story isn't over. And what comes next may surprise you in the most gentle, most healing way. You can stay. And when you're ready, you can begin again.